Welcome back to the Family Builders Conference, and I'd like to introduce each one of our committee members. This is Elder Hector Castillo. He's the pastor here at the Shalom Assembly of Yahweh. This is Elder Dwayne Wilson. He's the youth pastor and associate pastor here at Shalom Assembly of Yahweh. This is Elder Scott Lees. He's the pastor of the Messianic Fellowship of Yahweh. And where is it at? Yeah, it's one. Which one is it? Zeeland. And this is Pastor James King, the pastor of Cisco Assembly. And I'm Keith Wilson, and I also go to the assembly in Cisco. And we're going to have a discussion this evening on yielding control. And so what's going to happen is we're going to be raising some questions, and we're going to let the elders discuss those answers. And then after we have our discussion, we'd like for you to chime in also. If you have some advice or some wisdom you can lay down on us, or some experience, we'd love to hear that. And we have a policy, whatever happens at the Family Builders Conference gets shared everywhere. So make sure that what you're sharing, you don't mind being shared, because we're videotaping this, and we want to be a blessing to other people. And sometimes it is maybe you feel like, well, that doesn't apply to me. But the real story is you have an experience or you have a piece of wisdom that could apply to somebody else. And so we want you to be able to share that with us. So we're going to get started here about yielding control. And our primary goal this evening is to discuss the sometimes difficult transition between young adolescence, the beginning of the teenage years, into young adulthood, where we begin as parents to let go of the control that we have over where and what our kids are doing, and give that control and choice. Your son's in the front row, he's loving this right now.
And I love the question that I have.
Yes, you do not get an opening question. You can hold all questions till the end, please. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. The first question is going to go to James. Again, the topic is yielding control, and that is the transition that a teenager is experiencing, and we are experiencing as parents, giving them the choice and beginning to trust them. James, when do you let your youth start making their own decisions, and what kind of decisions do you let them make?
Never and none. Yeah, you know, I don't know if any of y'all out there experience this. I'm a control freak. My background, military and police and judge, all of that just led to being a control freak, or maybe that's why I gravitated to those jobs, because I was already a control freak. But I've got two kids that are in college, but the process of relinquishing that control was very difficult. But it needs to be a process. This isn't something that you control every aspect of their lives, and then suddenly they turn 18 or whatever and go off to college and are responsible for making their own decisions, or maybe somebody moves out and then suddenly they have the whole world in front of them, but they've never exercised a responsible decision in their lives. Our job as parents is to train our children, and part of that process is the process of slowly relinquishing control over the things in their lives so that they can start making responsible decisions. And that is difficult, but it needs to be a slow process. And gradually, as they mature, and this isn't an age thing. This is something that's dependent upon an individual's maturity. So it's hard to say, yeah, at 16 they can do this or whatever. They should be able to do this. It's all dependent upon their maturity. And some of our kids are not very mature at 16. Some of them are very mature at 12 or 13. And so it's really something that you have to gauge and slowly let them take over as they mature.
Can you give an example of maybe a simple decision that you started turning over to them to sort of get them all, started in the process of, getting used to making their own decisions?
Well, one of the earlier things was allowing them to manage their time more. You know, we used to be very controlling about bedtimes and when they could do certain things, and allowing them to start managing their time, especially with the thought process that once they're in college, they are, you know, they're an hour away in dorms and responsible for everything, every aspect of their life. And they have to have good study habits built within them, trained within them, and have their responsibility already exercised in the home, so that all of their work was done on time and appropriately, and my kids got good grades at that, or in school, but it was just a training process, and that's one of the things that you start relinquishing, you know, control over their study habits, over their bedtimes, and over that stuff, and see how they interact with that, see how successful they are with things, and then we'll talk later about how they fail and what to do about that kind of stuff. They can fail in some pretty big ways and disrupt a lot of stuff.
Does anybody in the audience have a statement or a suggestion they'd like to make about that question? How do you start letting your teenagers start making their own decisions? If you have something you think of along the way, we can take those sort of throughout the seminar here. Here's one. Daniel, would you mind running the microphone for us?
A good part about letting them have more control while they're in your home is you're letting them have control, but you're also kind of controlling that too. It's like a controlled chaos. So like you're letting them make those decisions, but it's in a safe environment that they're making those decisions. So maybe they want to have some friends that you think just aren't the best friends, but they're like, well, these are my friends, and so you're like, well, I'm gonna let you make the choices of which friends you know, to a certain extent, hang out with, but it's also in a controlled environment. You're gonna know if they're gonna come home drunk, or if, you know, I mean, if you're doing your due diligence of staying up for them or having them check in when they get home or whatever. So you're letting them choose their friends for the most part, but then you're also doing it while they're home, so that you can see what they're doing. So that's why you let them make those decisions, but you still kind of are keeping an eye on them. So it's a lot safer than when they are just off at college or off on their own. Even if they don't go to college, at 18, they can very well say, okay, I'm ready to just be on my own, go make it in the world. And so they can, but you can't keep them there, and you want to have them make their choices when they're with you, and you can guide them through the right choices.
I'm Elisa's dad. And I've come to believe that the earlier your children can start making their own decisions, the better. And these decisions have to be made in cooperation with their loving parents and with parents who love each other. So the two parents sit down with a young child and say, we are interested in you becoming the most successful adult that you can be. And you know, we understand that right now sometimes you feel like you need to throw a tantrum and get down and kick your feet and all that. But that's not going to work as an adult. That's not the direction that we have found gets success in people. So we want you to be successful as an adult. How do you think that should work out? And coach the child that way, knowing that you are on the same side. It's not a question of the parents trying to catch the kids in something so they can make them do what's right, or the kids trying to get away with all they can get away with. without their parents knowing about it. It should be a teamwork, a cooperation, trying to get the best result for the success of the child eternally.
Okay, let's appreciate that, both Elise and Tom. So, as I guess we can maybe move on here to the next question, which is, and this will be directed toward Dwayne, and that is, how do you react when your teenagers make bad decisions through this process?
Always with a high level of self-control. My son down there. Well, that's, these topics are very related as far as relinquishing control. There's a fine line between, controlling the way that we're talking about, like controlling decisions and being in a safe environment where they're deciding. But at the end of the day, there's also times when they're moving into that independence and, they're pushing a lot of things. And so when the way that we react, sometimes we overreact. And I think a lot of us catch ourselves doing that as they come home with something or they tell us something, and we're really pretty upset and pretty irritated that they made that decision instead of taking the time maybe to coach through them. So the reaction that we should have is we should be able to maintain the understanding that they're going to go out, they're going to become independent, and we have to guide them and help them through that. I think the trouble that we run into as parents, and why it sometimes gets out of control pretty quick in certain situations, is that we don't want them to get hurt. And we know that there are certain people, certain places, certain things that if they engage in, it's going to affect them for a long time. And so trying to give up control, but also control the chaos, but also keep them safe. If you're a parent that's awake and engaged, you certainly don't want to not say the hard thing or keep them from a decision that's going to affect them for the rest of their life. So our reaction has to be one to where you have to know your child's tendencies. You have to know how they're doing with other people. You have to look for the signs of, are they a leader? Are they a follower? When you give them simple directions, do they follow it, well? When you correct them, do they accept correction? Do they always buck against correction? And is there maybe something deeper in the relationship that's causing, the distance between you? And I think I was pretty surprised, I think, the first time that I got into a really heavy confrontation with my son about something, and I was like, when they were really little, this was so easy, and I probably gave a lot of people so great advice of just do this and just do that. But at the same time, when you get into the real issues and when they grow up and they become that independent, we want them to be fiercely independent and stand up for what's right. But I think as parents, we just have to react in a way that helps them get to where they're going, and not over-control, but also control in a way that keeps them safe.
And I think when you talk about reaction, Amanda and I had a pretty eye-opening experience a few weeks ago. We were talking with our youth group about the topic of lying and having an honest discussion about lying, if that makes any sense at all. And we were amazed at how we asked them, how many of you consistently lie or lie to your parents consistently? And many hands went up. So it was a time of honesty. And how can you ever know if you trust a liar? I don't know, but they could have been lying to us in the moment. But I don't think they were. And so then we asked them, why would you be lying to your parents, And they said, because if we told mom and dad the truth, or whatever, they will overreact. And when they overreact, then we get punished. And so we feel like everything's risk management to them. They're weighing the cost. Would it be better for us to lie and potentially get away with it and have a bit of freedom versus tell them the truth and get all freedom stripped away? So then I told them, maybe, hey, what if you just communicated with your parents and said, I know I've made a mistake here or whatever. I'd like to earn your trust back, and what can I do to get that back? As a parent, I would think that'd be a pretty mature conversation to receive from a child. What can I do to earn your trust back? I can think of 100 things you could do. And they said they tried it, but there's just no mercy. So no mercy. The parents are like, you're not getting the trust back. So I do think the reaction is a really important thing. It's very difficult, and I don't have teenagers yet, but I think that that's a really important aspect.
Yeah, one other thing I might add to the conversation, and you may or may not like Andy Stanley, but I really liked one thing that he said when he was talking with another person. Then they were having a sort of a parenting, how to help your children get through this stage. And one of the things that he offered that I've been thinking about and just gauging myself and how I react versus what he was saying. He said the best way to react is whenever they come home and they tell you anything crazy or anything that's like outlandish about themselves or about their friends, is just to say, "Oh, really? Okay." And then whatever it is, he said, and sometimes it's been like inside, it's like, "What?" Or, "Are you kidding me right now?" But he said on the outside, to maintain that, and that kind of verifies what you're saying from the young people is that if we're overreacting, then it makes it difficult for whatever reason for them to come and open up and be honest about where they are and what they're doing. And I'd really like to find that place to be, but I think sometimes as a parent it's really difficult to get your children to open up. But his advice was be very calm, and he said one of the things that stuck with me was he said if they come home and they say something about something that their friends did and you freak out about that, then they know that if they come home and say something about what they did, that you're going to freak out, and they're just intimidated by that, and they won't open up. So for whatever it's worth, I thought it was something worth thinking about and saying, okay, how is our reaction?
Does anyone have an example they could share with us of when maybe one of your teenagers came home after you've given them a bit of responsibility and they blew it and made a bad decision, but they shared it with you and you reacted right, or you reacted in a good way?
Yeah, we're in a difficult situation with 16, 17, soon, that area with the phone and, just the independence thing. But I've been listening to Red Bradley's tapes about parenting teens. Anyway, one of the things that really helped me with not getting so exuberant about, things that were going on or reacting too harshly or whatever was just keeping in mind I'm training. The word training it makes it just puts it in a different category. Otherwise I would be overreacting, getting upset, but just looking at it from, when you're training, then it makes me just kind of go, okay, now, and I start thinking about how to approach it differently and, ask questions and, bring, examples of other things into the picture. And anyway, it just has made it a lot different communication-wise.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll be talking about practical training tomorrow. It's a really good topic, and I hope you bring some more from those tapes. You can just keep that out there if you want to, and then next time. All right, so reaction is everything, and how you interact with teenagers just maybe depend or will help determine how much they trust you with those bad decisions. So next question is for you, Scott. How do you deal with teens who are making decisions against your family boundaries, and what if those decisions are causing chaos in your home?
I think there's a couple things to consider if it gets to that point. So, first of all, obviously something's gone very wrong in your relationship and your ability to relate to your teen if it's to that point. But there's a couple things to consider. One is the age of the child, and secondly, if there's other children in the home. So let's say the first scenario is they're 18 or over. The law will back you up if you've had enough of whatever behavior that they're bringing to your household that's causing this chaos. If you want to, you can draw a line and say, you have to do this somewhere else. You can't do it here anymore. I don't think that's a particularly good way to deal with it. But sometimes in extreme circumstances, that has to be our response. That can be our only response, especially if there's younger children in the house that are looking up to this older sibling, and it's causing them to maybe rebel against the parents' rules and boundaries in a way that's even bringing more chaos to the home. With a younger teen, we have a responsibility legally and scripturally and morally in every way to sustain them and allow them to be part of our family even when they're causing that chaos. So in those cases, I think we deal with it a little differently. If we focus on how they're causing that chaos. So let's say we've given them that cell phone that James talked about in his presentation. You have every right just to take that away from them, shut it down. Let's say that the vehicle that you're letting them use, the family vehicle or the vehicle that you've bought for them maybe in some cases, but is still in your name and you're paying the insurance on it and maybe paying the payments on it, whatever. In extreme circumstances, you just cut that off. And the point being, I think, if it gets to this point, you have to first take extreme measures to shut down the behavior that's disrupting your family. Then after that, though, you have to work towards a solution, a resolution, because they're going to be your child for a long time, hopefully, right? And so reconciliation is the biblical standard that we always have to shoot for, whether it's those teens in our house or whoever it might be. And so I guess the best advice on this is to, whenever possible, deal with it in a manner that shuts down the behavior first, and then work towards that heart change that you need to bring about that for some reason has gone astray. And also, as the parent, review your actions and how this has come about in your household, because maybe you've had some part to play in this. You know, it's not always on the child's shoulders. Sometimes how we've reacted up to this point, like we just talked about with the previous question here, brings about situations that are more chaotic than they have to be, and it's not necessarily on the child 100%.
So that was scenario one. I hate to remind you. But let's talk about maybe in scenario two, where we're dealing with maybe a 14 or 15-year-old. They're not 18, and you're, in that situation where they're doing it in your home, or they're bringing something to your home that, is against your boundaries. What we do there?
Well, I think I used a 16-year-old as an example. So, but I think but age does play a part in it, because a 16-year-old is not the same as a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old. But like we've already mentioned, it has to do with the maturity of the particular child as well. You really can't judge it totally based on age. It's got to be on what that child will respond to. Another thing that comes into play, which we touched on briefly here, is, do you homeschool the child, or does the child go to public school? Because if you homeschool your child, and I'm not promoting either way here, I know there's people here who do both. We did both, and and I believe there's benefits to both. But if you're homeschooling your child, you have a lot more control of the outcome of that scenario. If you're sending them off to public school every day, then you lose 8-10 hours of influence over them every day. And the only influence you're going to have is from the time they get home, and any communication that you might be able to engage with them for a short period of time is going to be very limited. And it's probably going to be stressful communication. If you're in a scenario where they're home with you all day, that has its own stresses. For anybody who's homeschooled their children, they can attest to that, I'm sure. But you have opportunities for free flow of interaction back and forth. It doesn't have to be pressed to a boiling point because you're limited and you got to take care of it right now. You can perhaps let things go for a little longer in those situations and just see how they react as you tighten down their boundaries. But also be cognizant then of how it is affecting their siblings, younger ones typically. Could be older ones in some cases. But you have to be really careful. And because this one child is taking up so much of your time and energy, you can't ignore what's going on and how it's affecting the rest of the household.
I think that's a really important piece.
Well, I was just going to say that when it comes to these kind of things, finding out who's influencing them when they're in that predicament. I mean, every parent, you should know, like who the major influences in their life, what their friends are. It seems like a generation ago it was a bit easier than it is today, because I can remember my mom, she's told me on several occasions, she said there was a time when she was hanging out with a certain girl and they had done something, but when she told me what it was that they had done, it was like, really? But her dad, my grandfather, came home one day after they were at church, and she came in, and when she walked in, he said, "I want to talk to you for a minute." And she walked over there, and he said, "It's time for you to find some new friends, and you won't be going to her house anymore. That's over." And she said, that's all he said, but I knew that I had to do something different. So making sure their influence and, who's influencing them, and making sure that, like Scott mentioned as well, is what I was going to mention, is that you really have to start controlling the environment when it becomes chaos. But I think also one of the things that we need to realize as parents is that there's going to be some tough conversations. Try not to get too out of control, knowing that this is going to pass, this season or this time will pass, and it's going to be a pretty troubled times. At times it gets very stressful, and your children are looking for you for leadership as much as they're also looking at you saying, "You're not giving me what I want." But, being patient through that, and realizing that they're going to cry, they're going to kick, they're going to scream, they're going to demand their cell phone, they're going to demand, whatever it is. And sometimes you just have to walk on through that and be the bad guy. And so many of us today don't want to be the firm disciplinarian, because we want to be friends with our children. And I love that scenario. It just doesn't work out so well sometimes.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything they could add to that conversation as we've raised this question about dealing with the boundaries in your home?
Michelle and I had a situation early on in raising our family where we had her siblings thrust into our household. And it really challenged us. Her younger brother was 10 when they moved in, and her sister was 16. And within a few years, we had a teen pregnancy in the home, and we had strife with our children and her younger brother. And while we were maybe step-in parents for her siblings because her mom was very hands-off, what we really had to come to was protecting our children from that without creating a us versus them environment. And in the case of that teen pregnancy with her sister, it was very clear who the parent actually was, because her sister came to Michelle and revealed what had happened and the situation where she was. And she understood, even when she came, that meant she was going to be cut off from the family. It was going to be dealt with outside of the home, and that played out. But it really challenged us early on, and much like you, Keith, we didn't have teenagers at the time, and we weren't really equipped to handle that level and scope all at once. But in a way, I feel like it prepared us for where we are now, where we had 4 teenagers in the home all at once, and it comes fast. And I think for parents that have teenagers, that's where this conversation really becomes relevant, because the situations start coming at you very quickly. And it's almost not just that we're training them, but we need the training on how to prepare for that. So that's why we come to Family Builders Conference in Sterling, Illinois.
Anyone else have something to add to that? Appreciate that thought, Solomon. Yeah, I think getting advice from other people is a good idea. Noah is going to be 12 in November, so one of the reasons that we're talking about this is because I personally have vested interest, Amanda and I do, in this topic. So it was good to bring that to the table. But I do think it affects a lot of people, and we want to. It's sort of like what Elder Tom was saying. We want to establish a relationship with our children where they can trust us and they can, talk to us about the things that they're going through and not be afraid of us, and us overreacting. And so that's an important aspect of it. So I guess we'll go on to the next question here, which is going to be directed towards Elder Hector, and that is, How do you know when your youth are trustworthy?
Are there any trustworthy youth out there? Raise your hand. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey, they're all trustworthy, including the 3-year-old down here. You know, I think that the question, it's a very good question, but I think you have to answer it in a very flexible way, because in terms of what you mean to be trustworthy, you know, a youth can be trustworthy in the big issues where it counts, and maybe just sort of be maybe distant from those things that don't necessarily matter. I guess, you know, I think about my children. We had 4 children. One of them, the oldest, if he's watching the broadcast, he knows that I will talk about him sometimes, and he gives me permission because it's a learning opportunity for other people. But he really tried us very hard. He tried Chris and I very hard during his teenage years. It was very difficult to deal with him. We knew we could not trust him. He pressed our buttons intensely. And in terms of yielding control to him, it was very difficult for us to do that, to the point where we wouldn't even let him participate in many things like youth camp and those kinds of things, because we felt like he wasn't mature enough. And basically, I think he tried to figure out how could he get away from doing what he wanted to do, but he was always getting caught. And that's one of the things I would always say to him. I was like, you know, you think you're getting away with something, but Yahweh's always there, and you're always getting caught at everything. So I think from a parent, you pretty much know. The question that you're asking is, how do you know? You just know. But I want to talk a little bit about how do you address it, because I made a lot of mistakes with him initially. And one of the things that I did to him is that sometimes when I knew the answer, I intentionally set him up to lie to me, instead of bringing up the issue with him, knowing that I knew all the facts, had all the information. I would test him to see if he was going to tell me the truth, knowing that he wasn't going to. And then that became a big deal. And he realized that I was sort of setting him up for the kill, if you will, when I really should have been more proactive and said, hey, listen, I know that this is what happened. I know how it happened. I know I have all the facts. I want to talk to you about what happened, instead of trying to set him up to tell me the truth when I knew he wasn't going to. I wish I had been more, at the time, I wish I had been more direct, but at the same time encouraging, where I felt I was more challenging and I was pushing him away when I thought I was teaching him a lesson. The lesson really wasn't being taught. The lesson that I wanted to teach was don't lie, and what he was teaching me was, I don't like the way you're approaching me, and I'm going to continually push and push and push. And so we ended up, I pushed, he pushed, and you know what happens when that happens? It's chaos. And so when I realized that with our oldest, then I changed that with our the other 3, our son, the younger son, and our 2 girls, where I became less sort of setting them up for knowing that they're doing wrong, and more direct with the information that I already had. I wasn't playing, I wasn't trying to set them up. There was not going to be any court. There was going to be no judgment. It was just going to be, this is what I know, let's talk about it. And those kids became more engaging, and they became more positive and more truthful and more honest, because they didn't feel like I was trying to, go behind their back and sort of trying to twist what they wanted to tell me. And so now since then I talked to my oldest son a lot, and we have a great, wonderful relationship. We've really mended a lot, and we've apologized to one another. And of course, he's the Shalom Assembly. No, he's part of this. He's back in the assembly. He's married. We have 2 wonderful granddaughters. But that was one of the difficult aspects of during the time when I thought I was parenting him right. I was actually creating him. I was causing him to be dishonest. And that's one of the things I have to caution parents. When you think you're teaching them a lesson, the only thing you're teaching them is that they have to be dishonest to you. But when you are direct with them and patient and loving and encouraging, they will know that you're being honest, you're being sincere, and that you really want to help them, and they'll be more apt to be honest with you and try to work with you. Because if I could do it all over again, we all know that we say that, but if I could do it all over again, I definitely would have done things different with him, because I feel like I was part of the problem. I didn't think I was at the time. I felt like I was the solution. But I realized that I was part of the problem in the way I handled it. And I put a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on him all the time. And I never really allowed him to vent and to just be himself, and I didn't put him in the corner where he could. I put him in the corner, but I didn't give him that freedom to sort of think, because I felt like I have to constantly be on him, just constantly pressure and pressure and pressure. And we all know what happens when we deal with a lot of pressure ourselves. We have meltdowns, we get upset, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would say, again, just to summarize, how do you find out, how do you know when your child is dishonest? You know. But the most important thing is, how do you handle it? And I think that being direct, encouraging, loving at the same time. If you already know the answer, you already know what they did, don't ask them what they did, because you already know the answer, because they're going to figure out you already know. And at some point, they're going to look at you and say that you are the one that's being dishonest, and you're trying to trick them. That's how they're going to see you. So that's what I would suggest.
Just for the record, I've never had a meltdown. Just ask Daniel.
Well, does anybody have a comment about that? Not about the meltdown, but more specifically about trusting your teens and so on.
Yeah. I'd just like to reiterate, an adversarial relationship is not what we want between us and our children. We want to be on the same team, directed toward the same end result.
Are there any teenagers in the room that are? By the way, we appreciate any young people that are at the conference, enjoying the conference with us. So if you have something you'd like to share with us old fogies, this is your opportunity to say, we're very trustworthy, and this is why. But any insight you have to give us, that'd be fine. We'd welcome that feedback, especially since you're going to sit through the time with us here. I think that as we talk about the topic of yielding control, the desire of parents, certainly my desire, is that, and we're going to talk about it more this weekend, that as our young people become older, we want to let them be in charge of more. And that's certainly the parental goal. It would be great to have an 18-year-old who could fully function and take care of themselves and completely understand roles and responsibility, and to be able to leave the home. That's a big goal of ours as well, is to have children who are able to leave the home and be productive in society. And so we do want to work together toward that end. And sometimes it seems like in the teenage years that the parents and teenagers are working against each other. One's pulling for freedom, the other one's pulling for control, when really they both want the same thing, and that is they want their teenager to be trustworthy. Teens want to be trusted, and parents want them to be able to leave, and that's what the kids want. They want to be able to go and do what they want to do, and the parents just want that to be done with responsibility. So last call on an opportunity to speak on that topic before we wrap this session up and continue. James?
One of the probably better instances of instruction I've found on a TV show one time. There was a situation where a very religious family was dealing with this situation, and I don't know if y'all have ever seen the show House, but there was this episode one time that this religious family was dealing with a medical situation, and the teenager was involved in this instance where he was being diagnosed with something, and he was adamant that he had not done anything wrong, that he had not engaged in any risky behavior that would have caused this, that he was very religious, that his parents just needed to trust him. They needed to trust him, they needed to trust him, they needed to trust him. And this was a scenario that played out repeatedly over this show, that he was very dedicated, very religious, and they just needed to trust him, that he had not done anything wrong. And it came down to the situation where his dad, after a long time of just saying, yes, I believe you, I believe you, I believe you, I believe you, I trust you, his dad kind of realized that, okay, I trust you as much as I can trust any teenager. And that's one thing that we need to realize in dealing with situations. Sometimes in our assemblies and dealing with other families and other kids, we all get the situation or get the perception that our kids are perfect. Our kids can never be wrong in any of the dealings that they interact with other people. Now, you don't have that same feeling when you're in your own household and they're rebelling against you. You quickly understand that they can be wrong and you're right. But whenever you're dealing with another family or something like that, the idea that your kid could be wrong, that what your kid is saying is not right, that they're not telling the truth, sometimes that we don't want to accept that. And in Cisco, we kind of developed what we call the parent network, where it was a common thing that other parents would come to you, and it was encouraged. If your kid was seen doing something wrong, another parent came to you and told you about it, and somebody would hear the gossip, and another parent felt free to come to you and talk to you about something that your kid may have done. And it created a culture where it was obvious that they weren't going to get away with a whole lot because it was going to get back to the parent. But it also helped to solidify relationships and to understand that, while you love your kid, you're trying to instill great morals in them and great responsibility and great behaviors in them as they grow. And that's what we're all trying to do. That along the way, they screw up just like everybody else does. It's not, whenever they get in a fight out on the playground, your kid can be just as much at fault as any of the others. Don't think that your kid is perfect, because we all mess up. You were in that same situation when you were a kid on the playground. You were just as much at fault as your kid now is. And so understanding that your kid isn't perfect, but everybody else's kids aren't complete failures either. Don't always blame the other kid. Be understanding that this may be a problem that your child has that you need to recognize and deal with, as opposed to always blaming somebody else or believing them when they blame somebody else.
I typically always blame other people's kids, so yeah, I'm probably who you're talking about. Well, if there's no other comments, then we're going to go ahead and wrap up this session, and feel free to share. One of the things we want to do at the conference is to share with each other. If you have a question or something you can add to the conference, then make sure that you have that opportunity to do that.